Hello and welcome to this episode of Demystified as we unravel home cooking in a modern world.
We're unraveling today, not exploring.
Well, I never know which one to say, whether it's unravel or explore, because sometimes it's a little bit of both. How are you going, Paul?
I'm a bit unravelled.
Well, it is Friday.
It's a Friday fun one.
Woohoo! And I know we haven't done a lot of cooking at the moment, as I explained, I think, earlier in the week, but I do have two little questions for you to start you off, because I know how you love those on the spot. During this week, we recorded an episode where I talked about pumpkin and adding oil on the outside and herbs, and that was really fantastic. But one of the things that you mentioned in that was about how to check for temperatures. And one of the things that we've just sort of discovered recently is that sometimes food probes in ovens can give off differing sensors to what you might think your oven's at. Potentially
sort of.
For those, because I've had some feedback from someone that their food probe, they don't know how to get it to work. It gives off different temperatures, and now they just don't engage it at all in their oven. Which I think, I don't know what was wrong, and I have to go around and have a look. But
you're doing home visits now.
Well, apparently, because you're always busy. But I said, look, I can't. I'm not a chef, but I'll see what I can do. But I just thought. Maybe this is something that you've experienced as well.
Yeah, so it's probably becoming a little bit more prevalent now. So a lot of ovens over the past, let's say, 8 years, let's say 8 years ago to now, a lot of, how can you term it, probably, and it's becoming a more standardised feature, that you will get a temperature probe included in the oven. Now, that's very distinct from different things that we're going to talk about here, right? Temperature probes that are included in ovens have a single use only, generally. Now, a lot of them will have different, what's the best way I can say, pick-up points of temperature across a needle. Generally, they're a needle. There may be sort of 6 to 8 centimeters long, and you insert the probe into a protein, right? And the use for that is internal temperature. So level of doneness, medium rare, well done, whatever, right? So you cook something to a desired internal temperature of your liking. What's coming and happening now and is more prevalent and more available, and like I think we've mentioned it before, I have a meter wireless probe. I've worked with other wireless probes as well, is the probes now are, well, some probes, and you can get them wherever, are wireless, right? Now, they essentially serve two purposes. The same as the original probes that were included in your oven that you plug in somewhere
and
into the cavity.
And they're connected to the oven, aren't they?
Correct. So it's a wired needle.
Our old Bosch one doesn't have that.
No, it doesn't.
Before that technology.
Yeah. But, I mean, that oven's got to be 10 years old now.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's still going.
Yeah. So they do the same task as that, internal temperature reading, but there is also a ambient temperature reading. So it tells you also what the environment temperature is. Now, this is where things are getting a little bit, not confusing, but potentially could be. So a thermostat in an oven, essentially, let's say we've got a digital screen oven, and most ovens these days have some sort of digital readout. It could be an LED, it could be it could all sorts of different things. But most ovens, not yours, but most ovens, you dial in the temperature and it comes up as a digital reading, and it will have an indicator of when the oven is up to temperature. Now, let's just say, for example, we're cooking something at 180 degrees. Forget the function, doesn't matter. We're cooking something at 180 degrees. So the oven has told us that it's up to temperature, and what's happening in the oven is the heating elements are turning on and off the whole time. So they're cycling, right? And the thermostat is dictating when it turns on and when it turns off. Okay, so an oven, whether you like it or not, when you set it at 180 degrees, is very rarely exactly 180 degrees. Because what happens is the thermostat goes, okay, you're about 182, I'm going to switch off. So it turns the heating element off. and then it drops down to 178, and it goes, oh, you're getting a bit too cool, I'm going to switch on. And what it's trying to do is find that perfect medium. Now, a really good oven will have a difference of what we call plus or minus 1 degree. So a good oven, when you set it at 180 degrees, will be 179, 180, 181. They're the possible temperatures that it could be if the thermostat is a really, really good one. And generally, the higher end ovens will work like that. So you're seeing on your display, on your oven, no matter what sort of oven it is, on the display, you've set 180, it's told you it's there, okay? And then we're going into roast. But in this scenario, we're going to use a wireless probe. So we put our roast in a tray of some description, or a roasting dish, or a pot, or a pan, or whatever it might be, and we stick our probe in. And our probe is telling us that the internal temperature when we start cooking might be 6 or 7 degrees, right? So pretty cold. And that's what we're really monitoring. But these days, what you also get to see is the ambient temperature. Now, that probe, let's say in the perfect world scenario, isn't touching anything, right? So the end of the probe, which is giving us the ambient temperature reading, is not touching anything. It's not touching the side walls of the oven. It's not touching the side of the baking tray, the dish, the whatever it is that you're cooking in. And what you will see is that the ambient temperature that your probe is telling you will be different to what your oven is telling you. And it can be different by up to about 20 degrees. So the probe might tell you that the ambient temperature that you're cooking in is 160. Your oven is saying the ambient temperature is 180. And this is where probably it gets a bit confusing.
Because the first thing you're going to do is think that one of them's wrong, and you'll crank up the oven to get it to 180 if the probe's telling you 160. And of course,
Correct.
That is the absolute wrong thing to do.
Yeah. So what you've got to understand is most thermostats in ovens are generally on the back wall of the oven and generally up high. Okay. Now, even when you're using a heating element with movement, let's say fan forced, so you're getting reasonable even heat distribution throughout the cavity because you got air movement. Now, I've always been a big advocate of air movement, and I think movement is a very important factor in all sorts of cooking, be it steaming, fan force cooking, sous vide, whatever. Because I think you can get a much more even accurate temperature when you have movement versus still. Now, because the thermostats in ovens generally, and I'm generalizing a lot here, there's no particular brand that does it super different to anyone else, but they're either right in the center of the oven at the top, and it will look like a little steel tube sticking out, right? If you want to have a look in your oven, it will look like, and it's in yours. They used to be attached to the side wall of the oven. It was like a little metal wire.
Yes,
yeah, okay. Yeah. And that's what's saying to the oven, I'm getting too cold, turn on. I'm getting too hot, turn off, right? And that's what it's communicating with the heating elements that you've chosen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what you have to understand is, no matter how good your oven is, when you add volume, and the tray equals volume, the baking tray equals volume, the dish equals volume, the beef or whatever it is you're cooking equals volume, and the temperature that is closest, or the temperature reading that is closest to that volume, which is in this scenario the ambient temperature reading of your wireless probe, will always be different, no matter what.
So the method here is not to panic.
Don't
just
change
trust what you're being told by both probes, by both elements, and let it do its thing.
Yep.
Do not crank it up.
No.
Do not think something's wrong.
Yep.
It's perfectly okay if that's the
case. Perfectly okay. Because it will get better over time, I would imagine, because what will happen is more manufacturers will find better locations to put thermostats, and the gap between what an ambient temperature reading on a wireless probe is and what the interface on your oven says, that gap will shrink over time. I have no doubt.
Which will take away some of the
potential confusion that might be coming, right? Because I know for a fact, and I've done this myself, I know for a fact that when I do a reverse sear eye fillet, which I do often at cooking demonstrations, I want that to cook at about 90 degrees. Now I know I need to set the temperature of the oven at about 110. I know I have to set it that bit higher because I want it to cook at 90 degrees. If I set the oven at 90 degrees, it would only cook at 70. So I'm really focused in on what temperature I want to cook my item at, and don't get too caught up in they've got to match. Okay? Yeah. It matters more at low end, so at lower temperatures. But if you think for 1 second that all of those recipes out there that say 180 degrees fan force for your chocolate cake, if you honestly think that your cake's being baked at 180 degrees, you're wrong. It's probably about 165, 170 in a good oven, in the middle shelf with movement. Because whenever you add volume, whenever you open the door, all of those things change what happens inside the oven. So even in the scenario that you preheat your oven correctly, we talked about that before.
I have practiced that now. I have adopted that as my,
So preheating your oven correctly, and that's about getting, so the thermostat doesn't have so many dips, right? Because we talked about hitting the walls of the oven and the cavity, and I still maintain that 20 minutes is about where you need to be for any preheat. Now it's different with steam, but any preheat of a dry heating function in an oven, 20 minutes is about right. But at the lower end of the temperature scale is where I think there will be a larger difference. But yeah, don't panic, don't go changing everything, and just remember, whenever you add volume, you change that whole environment, the whole environment. And while the oven may say that it's maintaining at 180 degrees, at the thermostat it is, but that's not where you're cooking your cake. You're cooking your cake 2/3 of the way down in the middle. And so what temperature the cake is actually cooking at and what temperature the thermostat is reading are two very different temperatures. It's just these days, if we put that same scenario in a piece of beef and we have the ability to monitor the ambient temperature, there will be a difference. But just don't go freaking out and changing it.
No, exactly. That's rule number one. Don't change. Thank you for that. The other question I wanted to ask was, I think I mentioned that I have a new foodie crush, the Adam Liao show. Liao, sorry. I can't even pronounce his name. Oh my God, he's never going to invite us on now. And
yes, I'm doubting that's funny. Ever going to happen.
I know, but anyway. But I was watching it the other night and this lady got on, she was a chef, and they were doing sort of desserts and they were doing like minimum quantity desserts.
Yep. Was this Bridget?
I don't know.
Did she do like 3 ingredient chocolate cake?
Yes, 2 ingredient.
So I actually know her.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, I took issue with her.
Okay.
Because she said, "I'm making this," and it looked great. You know, the eggs.
I didn't see it by the way.
The eggs, chocolate. It was eggs and chocolate, and she separated the eggs, whipped up the egg whites to create that volume, melted the chocolate, stirred it through, and into the chocolate she added the egg yolks.
Yeah.
While it was warm, and then added that mix to the whites, and then put it into the baking tray. But she said, I'm making this super healthy dessert. It's sugar-free, gluten-free, and at that point I went, okay, so what is... I know we've talked about this before, but I do not understand why everyone thinks, unless you're allergic to gluten, why is gluten-free healthier? Because gluten's not a bad thing for you.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, I'm not a dietitian, but I've asked my friends who are, and they don't understand this either necessarily. If you're allergic to gluten, absolutely, it is the pits, it is the worst. And I do know people who are allergic to gluten, and their life is quite difficult getting that organised. But if you're not allergic and really allergic, how is taking gluten out of your diet healthier?
You are asking the wrong person.
Well, if you know her, maybe you should ask her.
Well, I have met her a few times. She and I used to work for the same company.
Okay.
And I know she is big on the health food. And from memory, she may well be herself gluten intolerant, which is probably what drives her to create the recipes that she does. But... Now, I'm just guessing it was her because I didn't see the episode. Yeah, I haven't seen the episode. I did see her coming up on an ad and I saw it on her Instagram profile. So
I don't really know the names.
Yeah, I would suggest that it probably was her. Why is gluten bad? Honestly, I don't know. So in the scenario that I work, well, in the situation that I work in, when I need to cater for dietary requirements, I don't ask why. I just do it.
No. If someone says they're allergic to something, no problem.
Yeah.
But in a general statement to say this is sugar-free.
Well, it is.
And we all agree sometimes too much sugar is bad.
Yeah.
But I don't understand the gluten unless you are absolutely gluten intolerant.
Yeah.
Like I know people who are fructose intolerant. I can't eat mushrooms. I know people who are...
Yeah.
You know, we all have, maybe not all, but a lot of us have something that we shy away from. But gluten as a
product, yeah,
I don't see anything that says it's bad.
Yeah, but it's
so I took issue
it's
with
no
that.
different to people doing paleo diets or keto or any of those sorts of things. You know,
sure.
Is it a fad? I don't know. Is it psychosomatic that people feel better because they
don't know.
Eating it?
I don't know. If you have a nut allergy, I get it.
Yeah,
I get all that.
No, I understand that.
But to say that a food group, if you're making a healthy dessert but you're excluding gluten, I don't necessarily see those two as...
Yeah.
Anyway.
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I very much from my perspective, and like Joel, who we worked with, you know, one of his
absolutely
children is gluten-free now.
Yeah, that was a lot of testing to determine that.
Yeah, correct.
They worked that out. No problem.
And that affected it affected his mood, it affected his demeanour,
totally.
It affected his ability to learn, like all those sorts of things. So maybe it does for some people have some impact, but I don't look at it from the perspective of I just look at it from a perspective of that's annoying for me more than anything else. Because if I'm doing a dinner for 15 and there's one person gluten-free, now, not that I use a lot of... I think any good meal starts with bread. There, I'll say it, right? Yes. Like, I can't do a dinner without making bread. That's just... I think maybe it's working in French restaurants too long. I don't know, right? But I think a good dinner starts with bread. Always have, always will, and maybe it's just old school thinking. But I also think that, there is something very comforting about the smell of a fresh bread being baked somewhere, and you get there and it's cut in front of you and whatever, right? I like the whole idea behind it. Now, in the scenario of the way I work, if I'm doing dinner for 15 people and there's one person gluten-free, then I have to come up with at least what are they going to have in place of bread. Now, I know there's gluten-free breads and stuff like that, but they're rubbish, right? And I've tried and tried and tried.
We've tried banana flour, we've tried all sorts of
things. All
things.
sorts of stuff, and I still haven't come up... And I've come up with some that you could tolerate and say, yeah, that's okay as a gluten-free bread, but it's just not the same. It is just not the same. So I just find it more than anything. And the funny thing is I actually when I cook, and a lot of the way that I cook and a lot of the foods that I cook for, let's say, the remainder of this dinner will very rarely contain gluten. Maybe dessert, you can leave a few components off, but the rest of it generally not. Right? So desserts are pretty easy. Main course, entree, whatever, is pretty easy. And because not often am I thinking, okay, I'm just going to go straight for the flour for this. It's not something that I
just wondered.
But
I'd wonder what your thoughts were, because, so I know cooking for a vegetarian or vegan, I get all that.
I find vegans hardest. They're the hardest, because I think when you remove the ability to work with eggs, it's very difficult. Because eggs are hugely responsible for a lot of things. Like, when you remove eggs and dairy, I find that very difficult. That's the hardest
the way that you like
me.
to cook, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I understand that.
Yeah.
And had she said maybe it's sugar-free and something else, but when she said it's really healthy because it's gluten-free and sugar-free, I thought, wow, I don't agree. And I thought, I wondered what your thoughts were, and we've probably opened a can of worms, but...
I really don't have any viewpoint on it. I mean, I think the price of gluten-free food is a bit rich. Like,
Yes.
it's very expensive to have. But if it makes people feel like they feel better, then go for it. I don't care. Like, it's fine. I'm surprised that it wasn't more prevalent when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm surprised that, like, because I don't think it's something that you couldn't have found out back in the day. So, but I don't remember any of my parents' friends or anyone that was gluten intolerant. Like, you wouldn't have seen a loaf of gluten-free bread 10 years ago.
No.
15 years ago, probably.
I know things have changed in the last few years.
Yeah.
But, I just wondered.
I mean, there must be some scientific evidence to support the fact that
I think we're getting more and more allergies. There's more and more, I think we're getting more aware as well.
I mean, the first thing I did when my little fella was old enough was put a teaspoon of peanut butter in his mouth. It was one of the first things that I gave him, because I thought, if you don't get exposed to it now, you're more likely than not you're going to end up with a nut allergy.
Yeah.
Like, now, was it right, wrong? Who cares? I don't know.
Well, he didn't suffer.
No.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah. But so the gluten one, I don't know. Generally, I have an opinion about everything, Linda. But I really don't about this.
I know, you actually don't. No, it's quite surprising for you.
No, for me, it really is, for me, when I'm catering for any sort of guest event, whatever, vegan is the toughest. When you take away eggs for me, and dairy, like that's making my life hard.
And yet I've seen some of the exclusions. There are exclusions on us in your catering preferences sometimes, and it's definitely vegetarian or pescatarian or vegan.
Yeah.
Or I don't eat beetroot, I don't eat cauliflower.
Well, I mean, a lot of,
they're hard because you're like, well, is it just a preference? I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, I recently hosted an event where we had, I think there was 8 guests and 3 were pescatarians.
Okay.
So for me, when I'm transporting food and equipment and all sorts of stuff to an external venue to do this, for me that night, everyone's pescatarian.
Yeah, and
because I've got to do 4 courses, one set of hands.
Well, I should just tell our listeners that the reason you are catering is you're not being a private chef.
No.
You're actually trying to use a small group of people and educate them on cooking appliances, on cooking techniques, and how the appliances all work together to provide this. And so you're doing a demonstration, but at a higher, more technical level to a small group of people. And so you've only got, unless you're going to serve them, cheese toasties, which you can't because people are gluten free.
Yeah.
So anyway.
But no, I don't really sort of, if that's people's choice and they think it makes them feel better. No different,
but I took issue with her saying it was definitely healthy because it was this, and I thought, no, you can say it's that. You can say this is it's gluten free. Yeah,
and so your point is it's not necessarily healthier because it's gluten free.
No, she could have just said this is a gluten free, sugar free dessert that might suit a lot of people.
Yeah, I
would have been going, okay, I'll listen, but and it might have just been a slip of the tongue.
Yeah.
But I thought she's actually a chef. This is not just a home cook, not knowing.
Yeah.
But when she's a chef, I kind of hold her to your standards, and a lot of things.
Yeah, but don't know much about gluten. I know how it works.
Yes.
Because you need to know how it works for when you're making a really nice, crispy, crunchy sourdough. Yeah.
Imagine that. I know you can't eat some shellfish, but imagine you couldn't eat.
No. No, it's not worth living. No bread, no butter. See you later.
That's it.
Just put me in the box.
Just rolling my toes up there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. Thank you for that. And a happy weekend, everybody, and happy cooking over the weekend.
Eat some gluten. You'll be right.
Or not. Or not. It's your choice. But anyway.
It is. It's your choice.
It is your choice.
Yeah.
So take care, everybody. Happy cooking. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to this podcast as we explore home cooking in a modern world. We'd love you to subscribe, and for more information, please go to our website, cookingwithsteam.com.